Hello, loves. Today I have compiled quite a few good stories. Let's get started. Story: The Blaze, a short horror story. The seas did speak to Walter. Yet, he didn't wish to listen to their ominous tune. An ice-cold fear of those salty waves crept up his spine, as the fog did creep across the shore. That invisible frost lent the old man some ease. "It's merely the cold," he whispered, shivering, "nothing more." He glanced at the brick of the lighthouse and quickly got back to work. Yet, even as he reassured himself, he made nary a glance at those heavy waves. A deep gray settled over his abode, a thick blanket of lethargy that snaked up the ivory tower of the foreboding lighthouse. "Accursed thing," the keeper muttered, his voice snatched away by the waves as if starved. He spoke no louder, as if afraid to be heard by the very ocean itself. Thus, he toiled away in the midday fog, careful not to peek at those icy waves as they crashed, the heavy crests leaving foam scattered on that dreary shore. A rotten stench rose on the newfound breeze. The old man's lips trembled as he looked upon the overcast sky. A storm fast approached from the east, with it the dreaded night. A worrisome amount of gulls flew overhead, their cries of delight disconcerting as they dove into the dark depths. Something caught Walter's watchful eye as he scanned the foam cautiously. A large piece of wood emblazoned with dark lettering. His face wrought with fear, Walter rushed inside. Hours passed as he sat in silence, shivering despite a smoldering fire in front of him. He poked at it restlessly as his teeth chattered. Every creak that shattered the silence earned a quick survey of the small room he was sequestered in. A suffocating anxiety plagued Walter, made much worse by the sudden crack of lightning. He flinched and his lips turned up into a grimace as the rain began pattering on his feeble house. That awful feeling persisted, and hung in the air as the last needles of sunlight were swallowed by the gray of the clouds and sea. With a shaky breath he drummed his fingers on his wooden chair, mulling over his yet-to-be-had arduous journey. Chest rising and falling rapidly, he muttered 47 steps. The 2nd and 37th squeak. Mustn't make a sound. He repeated his nightly mantra until the words were seared upon memory. The fear somewhat abetted by the cauterization of that chant, he stood, eyes hardened and knuckles whitening. With a gaunt face he snatched a coat and made his way out the door. Quick steps were drowned out by the immense downpour. Scurrying towards that formidable structure, he pulled the cloak tighter to shield himself from the chill. A flash of lightning illuminated the waves as Walter made haste. Barely containing a cry of fear, he sprinted as fast as his knobbly knees could carry him. Throwing open a slippery old door, he bolted inside as if the eyes of the sea were focused on the pathetic man. His heating pants broke the quiet of the room as his eyes darted around, wildly scanning the dark. Not nearly satisfied that he was alone, but with little time to waste, he began his careful, tedious ascent. 47 steps. The 2nd and 37th squeak. Complete and utter darkness wrapped around him as he tentatively touched his gnarled old boot on the first step. 1, he said so inaudibly it perhaps didn't actually make a sound, but it thundered through Walter's mind, a roaring crackle. He reached his foot over the 2nd and touched the 3rd. 3. This continued for some time until the last blessed step came. Despite the chill in the air, the grizzled old man was covered in a sheen of salty moisture. He was unsure if it was sweat or tears. At last he stood before a simple wooden door. Yet, the man's terror had his heart in a firm embrace. He knew what agony awaited. Eyes glazed with fear, pupils dilated so that the earthy brown was swallowed whole by inky blackness. Walter slowly raised a shaky hand, pushing open the door. Pale tapestries of moonlight danced around him, reflecting off the glass of the lighthouse. An eerie silence descended, prevailing over the relentless storm. Fumbling in his trousers, he pulled a matchbook free. Hands quivering, he held them with a terrible fear. As if striking them were an evil deed. Holding one aloft, he brought it down with a whimper. A sharp hiss followed as a ghostly orange light barely held down the pressure of the dark. "Please," he said with trembling lips, his voice barely penetrating the quiet. He threw the match in the oil. It twirled in the air, small circles of light glinting over every surface. Not a moment later the match's flame touched the oil. A great fire erupted as he leapt towards the floor, glancing towards that obsidian tide, revealed only by that hellfire. Hundreds of ghastly faces stared back from beneath the waves, welcoming him to their cold embrace. They seemed to dance in the tide, unaffected by their shredded bodies. "And oh," he shrieked in fright, trembling as the corpses called. "Please. Forgive me," he wailed as he doused the fire and curled up on the floor, whimpering pitifully. He lay there shaking and sobbing in shame. The storm could not drown out the brutal screams and crashes as the starving sea pulled more unlucky to their domain. Story: The Forgotten Shadows. Open with eerie, unsettling music and a dark, gloomy background of an old, abandoned house. Introduce the protagonist, Emily, a curious urban explorer with a passion for uncovering hidden histories. Emily hears rumors about the old Rayburn house on the outskirts of town. The locals say it's haunted, but Emily doesn't believe in ghosts. She decides to explore the house, hoping to find some interesting artifacts or hidden stories. Emily approaches the house at dusk, capturing the decaying exterior with her camera. As she steps inside, the door creaks loudly, and a chill runs down her spine. The air is thick with dust, and the floorboards groan under her weight. While exploring the main hall, Emily finds an old, dusty photo album. She flips through the pages, seeing pictures of a happy family. Suddenly, she hears footsteps behind her. She turns around, but no one is there. Her heartbeat quickens, but she dismisses it as her imagination. Emily ventures deeper into the house. She hears whispers echoing through the halls and sees shadows moving in her peripheral vision. She tries to rationalize these occurrences, but feels an increasing sense of dread. She finds a door leading to the basement. Despite her fear, curiosity drives her to descend the creaky stairs. The basement is dark and damp, filled with old furniture and broken toys. She feels a cold breath on her neck and turns around to see a ghostly figure of a little girl staring at her. The ghostly girl points to an old trunk in the corner. Emily opens it to find newspaper clippings about the Rayburn family. They reveal a tragic story of a fire that killed the entire family, except for the little girl who went missing and was never found. Emily realizes that the ghost is the missing girl, seeking closure. Emily tries to leave the basement, but the door slams shut. The whispers grow louder, and the shadows close in on her. She understands that the spirits of the house are not malevolent, they are trapped, reliving their tragic fate. She promises to help them find peace. With the ghostly girl's help, Emily finds a hidden diary in the trunk. The diary details the family's final moments and the girl's escape plan that failed. Emily takes the diary and manages to open the basement door. As she exits the house, the spirits seem to fade, finally at peace. Emily leaves the Rayburn house, vowing to tell the world their story. She publishes her findings, and the house becomes a memorial for the Rayburn family. The video ends with Emily looking back at the house, now at peace, and a message about the importance of remembering and honoring the past. Story: The Void in Purity. I sat in the waiting room, bored out of my mind. The magazine I was reading had lost my interest. "Emily Thompson, you're up," the doctor said, stepping into the waiting room. A lady stood up and followed the doctor to another room. When I entered the hospital, she was the only other person in the waiting room, so I knew I was next up. I looked up at the TV, still on the news. Since I had arrived, it was just boring celebrity news, nothing important. But now it was showing interesting things. Serial killer caught in France, found guilty of 8 acts of murder. It showed his mugshot, with a dark shade of gray next to it. "That's his blood purity?" said the man sitting next to me. "Jesus, that's really dark. That's what killing 8 people does to you," I said. It felt like me and the man were about to start a long conversation, but before it could get any further, "Jake Anderson," the doctor said, peeking into the waiting room. I stood up and walked with the doctor. After only a few minutes, the blood donation was ready to begin. I looked over at the bag filling with my blood, and the doctor seemed impressed. "Your blood is very pure," he said. "You must be a very good person." "Well, thank you," I said, "but isn't this a normal purity?" The doctor looked at the bag again. The blood was almost completely white, with only a tiny bit of darkness. "Every single sin you commit makes your blood a little less pure," he said. "It's incredibly impressive to have blood this pure in your 30s. After only a few more minutes, I left the hospital. I checked my phone to see a message from my wife. "Tell me when you're on your way back, so I know when to start on dinner," she said. Of course, I responded, telling her I was going home now. I reminisced about our first date. I still vividly remembered her dark hair and crimson red dress. Soon later, I arrived home. As I walked through the door, I was hit by a delicious smell. But it was also very noisy. My 2 kids were running around and causing chaos. My wife was trying to juggle between cooking dinner and trying to make the kids behave. I walked into the kitchen while she was cooking. She was so focused that she didn't even notice me. I snuck behind her and wrapped my arms around her. "Olivia," I said, with a flirtatious voice. "Jake," she responded with a sigh of relief. "How did the donation go?" she said. "It went well," I responded vaguely. The look in Olivia's eyes told me I had to say more. The doctor was really impressed by my blood purity. "That's wonderful," she said. "You know, I still haven't seen your blood purity," I said with a curious tone. Yeah, I know," Olivia said with a slightly annoyed tone. "I was a huge bully back in high school, so I'm a little ashamed of my blood purity." Olivia got back to cutting vegetables. I decided to drop the subject, knowing it was really sensitive for her. But before I could say any more, there was a loud crash sound. I looked over to see my children had knocked over an expensive vase, and it shattered. But as I turned towards the commotion, I suddenly heard another loud sound, a high-pitched cry. The sudden commotion startled Olivia, and the tip of her middle finger had slipped right where the knife was cutting. I quickly grabbed a towel to help, but I saw a horrible sight, one that made me jump back in fear. Olivia's blood was pitch black, having absolutely no reflection, no glimpse of light, just pure darkness. Anything it touched looked like it disappeared. I stood there, staring in shock. The killer in France who had murdered 8 people didn't even have blood that dark. What the fuck did she do? I felt like I was in some sort of hypnosis, but I was suddenly snapped out of it with a sudden flash of light. A bit of blood had fallen off of the knife, revealing its shiny silver. I suddenly grabbed my kids and ran to the car. I didn't have time to explain the situation before running off. As I drove away, I could hear screams of despair and anguish coming from the house, from Olivia. My kids screamed in fear, not knowing what was going on. Did they even see Olivia's blood? No, I don't think they had any idea. After what felt like an eternity of driving, I stopped. I broke down crying. What should I do? I can't go back there with that sociopath. But can I really abandon everything I had? What will I tell my kids? My parents? What about the police? She has clearly done something horrible and unforgivable, but I don't know what. Shit. I'm muttering to myself. What do I do? What can I do? Am I truly helpless? Story, beginning of the end horror story. My name is Jonas, and this is the story of how I survived the Great War of the 21st year. This is the story of my scars from the front lines. Born in the year 99, I was born under the name Josiah M. Springfield. My mother worked as a carpenter, and my father, well, I didn't see him much, but I heard strange stories about his adventures. Some said he was a pirate working off the coast of Florida. Others said he was a document repairman in a place called a material yard working on some secret project. Many people found and entered his garage, however, anyone who entered never came out again. I myself worked in a few different places where I was able to find work because the war was going on. Jobs were very scarce, as were fuel and other necessities. Luckily I didn't drive and I run everywhere or ride my bike, which means I'm often bullied by people for not knowing how to drive, but this means that if I need to, I can run about 5 miles without getting tired because I'm not lazy and I'm extremely active. However, because of my strength, I was often beaten a lot, with them saying run faster than this girl, and sometimes they still do that because I'm weak. Like a cruel game, they signed me up for the 8th year of bombing, because they know the physical wound will heal, but the wound never leaves you. You will never forget the pain horror of war. But it was my sense of rightness that kept me going, and my epiphany. That would be the key to keeping me alive, amid the most hysteria since the early 2-wave years. Everything went well until one day, while eating breakfast, I received a letter and was assigned to the 580th Air Force under the sole command of Lieutenant Leaf. The war against the so-called furries was going terribly wrong, with bombing raids taking place in the skies every night over the small town of Handleton with a population estimated to be the size of an average football stadium. They liked to tokenize people. They used history as inspiration for their intimidation, mainly with documentaries about World War II. Using blueprints, they recreated old fighters with improvements they made perfect. Despite being intelligent furry people, they are easily distracted by something shiny. This was their main method against them until they created an injection that could transcend all dimensions, and all the ability to create them is distracted. I was assigned to a bomber crew of 25 people, and the plane was called Lucky 13. I was given badges and ordered to bomb 2 major cities with the crew, 2 cities which are called Owatan and Fur City. 2 hours passed and we were flying over the city of Owatan. The first commander in the drive shouted at us, "That's right, you worm. I want to see these bombs fall on this city so much that it hurts. I don't want to see a single inch of it left. Give these furries their own damn medicine. What do you say?" Everyone responded with a quick "Gura." As soon as the bombs began falling silently to the people and the giggles of the monstrous crew members were heard, the whirlwind of chaos broke out. Although on the bomber it was also easy to find one by one running to safety, even though it was almost architectural, when a nest was found and then, again, heard that cry and then said, Commander Look came back at us with unbelievable beaked faces, shouting at us I'd fly down there and finish the job. You good-for-nothings get down there and finish them off. And if I hear one of you, if that hairy bastard is saved, I will send the machine to an honorable military court. One by one, the men jumped out of the plane in perfect synchronization, chanting military tunes to stimulate themselves, until there was only one left. Me, and then there was the unmistakable sound of 300 caliber bullets stretching out the sides and the engine of Lucky 13, and it was now or never. I had to jump or I would die. I would know error. I prayed to God above and jumped out the back, and everything slowed down and started to almost stop. Is this where I die? I heard the noise of the terrifying Hyena Mk2 coming in above me. The propeller almost grazed my head, or 5 meters not far behind the Hyena was the famous Wasp Mk3. Both of these aircraft were 2 of the most fearsome aircraft models ever built by the Ardvakian military. Not far behind is the heavy cruiser Sea Serpent, weighing about 100 years, the most powerful and powerful. As pure as one can make by hand. As I continued to fall, watching my life flash before my eyes and the wind rustling my hair and passing through my ears, I heard a faint, yet distant call, "He once." Again I heard what sounded like a woman's voice. "Hey you idiot, you will destroy the cement. Hey. What the hell, get them out." I woke up to find myself less than 200 meters above the ground and continuously rushing towards the ground, and I pulled my parachute at just the right moment. Fear and anxiety paralyzed me as I pulled it. My knees. I comforted the house with a tremendous force, and I heard a tremendous pull and a sharp pain in both knees. The parachute pulled me through the roof. The pain was unimaginable. Finally, I slid down the house and hit the ground. I hit my head on the flower pot and felt myself being pulled inside. As I felt myself being pulled into this stranger's house, I could feel them struggling with the weight of my still body being pulled through the door, the occasional light coming on underneath. My closed eyes, blinking at an uneven pace, shoes I placed on a certain bed. There was a strong smell, something I had never smelled before. I almost thought I had dipped my head in skunk urine mixed with pig manure. I inhibited waking up and screaming. The scream was delayed from where I was fallen to my fate. My heart was faster than ever. My anxiety was at its peak. I finally woke up and I couldn't see anything. There was an incomprehensible darkness that covered my face even though it was drawn to the darkness like a moth to a lamp. I woke up, screaming with such excitement that my vocal cords felt like they might melt. The lights flashed from the intensity, and then the unintelligible sound of a door was smashed open, not echoing throughout the room with such intensity. I had never experienced this before. Finally, after what seemed like years of deep sleep, I heard a distant, barely audible voice. "Is that you? Or not?" He didn't expect that he would wake up so early. Let me postpone the search plan. My cell door opened. It took a long time for the light to penetrate every corner of the room. It was as if the room itself was bathed in light, absorbing every particle of light into the cushioned walls, like a chocolate connoisseur enjoying every moment of it. I wished I never woke up when I saw the state of the room. Every square foot of the room was covered in blood, organs, and feces, and I realized what that smell was when I first arrived, when light finally flooded into the padded psychiatric hospital-style cell, and when my eyes finally adjusted, I saw a woman, though she wasn't quite a woman. I can't determine the type. Story: Broken Lights, a short horror story. Her breathing was wheezed. Her pacing was quick, and her focus was everywhere. Sasha's adrenaline was spiking her heart and movements in a way that shouldn't be possible. Her energy was almost endless because of it. The screams of the hostile beings running after her were loud, ear-splitting even, sounds that would render someone's throat raw if attempted to replicate. Their footsteps matched her pace, if not quicker. Feet sprinting in the grass that shuffled from theirs and her own movements. The grass surface turned to cement. Her shoes clunked against the hard surface as she ran for her life. Dodging towering metal crates and screeching monsters, her way was blocked by a looming metal warehouse. Seeing no other option, she kept her pace up for its wide-open door. Hearing one of the creatures behind her grow ever so closer, feet getting faster and louder, breathing more quickly and heavier down her neck, she dove for it. The moonlight was masked by pure darkness, her body toppling to the cement ground of indoors, her flashlight shattering on the ground. Turning to look at the open door, she threw herself up. It screamed before she threw the door closed, turning the lock. Her breathing wheezed, shuddered as she slouched forward against it, resting her forehead against the door's surface. Her breathing was so strained it was difficult to pin it between her lungs begging for air or emotions taking over, and she was on the verge of crying. Either way, she was struggling. Her legs shook in weakness, the adrenaline fading and almost begging for her to collapse. She kept herself standing, however. Looking over her shoulder, she only just now realized that the building was completely pitch black. Her mind was too originally focused on escaping with her life still intact. Diving to her knees for the flickering flashlight on the ground, she picked it up. No. No. The glass was shattered, the light bulb inside flickering in an attempt to stay alive. She smacked its surface onto the palm of her hand in aggressive attempts. That only seemed to make it worse. With one more firm pound of it against the palm of her hand, it died. The light dimmed before the entire building shrouded her in complete darkness. Her breathing shuddered. She was completely defenseless against the Weavers. The Weavers. Human hybrid creatures of complete hostility. Broad-shouldered human beings who have succumbed to their form. Clothes ripped and tattered to almost nothing but rags. Skin a sickly pale, black bags under their glowing orange hungry eyes like goggles, hands and feet completely black like they were burned, nails so long that they could reach their knees without even bending over, ears sharp and pointed, and jaws split into arthropod-like mandibles, salivating, clicking and screeching in communication. Their motivation is unknown, and so is their origin, for what she knew. But the way they treat humans is cemented and true. Angry, hostile, and deadly. Some kill on the spot, others drag them away, never to be seen again. She was pursued by 3 of them in that chase. From the glance she got over her shoulder, two were male, and the other was female, easily distinguishable by their appearance and host. The people at the safe house told her it was a bad idea to go out by herself. "Sasha, you'll get yourself killed." She took it anyway. Sasha lifted her head, staring into the empty black void of the warehouse before her. Adjusting her black long hair, she reached into her pocket, pulling out her phone. She opened up the camera and pointed her phone to the darkness before her. With a press of her thumb, the camera flashed. With the camera flash, the terrain was revealed to her for only a second. Towering metal shelving units with wooden crates. She hated that she could only see for a split second. She hated the dark. She doesn't fear it itself. She fears what might be hiding inside it. She fears that something would just jump out at her the moment she presses that camera button. Despite the fear growing inside of her, she pressed on. She slowly stepped further into the darkness to accomplish her quest that she started the moment she stepped out of the safe house. To find her two missing kids. It has been hours since she has last seen them since this whole problem began. A part of Sasha wanted to look for a light switch, but in reality, that would be fruitless. The town is devoid of any power. The power plant was ambushed by the weavers, the phone tower was attacked and the radio tower's cords were cut. The town is stuck in a blackout. No lights, no power, no communication to the outside world. They were isolated, and the world was completely ignorant of what this town is currently going through. Pressing the camera button on her phone again, it flashed, exposing her path for another second. She was slowly treading down a narrow hallway of towering metal shelving units. But in the end, it was hard to tell where she was going since all she could see was just a wall of darkness in her path. She pressed it again, and her heart stopped for a second. Laying on the cement ground before her in that second-long flash was a pink ribbon. She dove to her knees, shock overcoming her as she gently scooped up the pink, glistening ribbon. Her breathing shook as did her arms as she lifted the light little ribbon in her hands. Her daughter's ribbon. A ribbon fixed into a bow in the back of her head to make her hair ponytail, and here it was, laying on the ground and now clutched in her mother's hands. Lifting her head, looking forward, her heart stopped again. A shoe. A blue sneaker. Her son's sneaker. Sasha felt like she could cry. She buried her face into her daughter's ribbon, weeping for them. She could just imagine the situation they were in. Her daughter holding her brother's hand, leading him away, running, screaming, their young child's shrieks echoing in the warehouse before being caught by these monsters. She expected the worst to happen to them, and the thought would not go away. It brought tears to her eyes, water falling down her face as she sobbed into the tattered pink bow in her hands. A small part of her had a glimmer of hope. Maybe they were dropped in their escape. Maybe her bow wasn't fixed tightly to her head and unraveled off. Maybe her son's shoe slipped off during the run to safety. A choked breath jumped out of her as she lifted her head from the ribbon. Okay, she regained what little composure was left. Stay focused. With the mindset that they have escaped, she pressed on. She shambled through the darkness, occasionally pressing the camera on her phone to illuminate her way for a second. She stepped into a small opening, or at least it felt like she did. The thick air suddenly got thinner and it felt more open. Sasha shuffled forward through the dark, treading through a blanket of nothing. Her foot slipped on something wet. Her leg was thrown forward. Sasha gasped, toppling backwards. She crashed to the cement floor, the breath being knocked out of her. A groan growled from her throat as she sat up. She stared ahead to make out anything that she stepped on, but it was near impossible. Sitting up and shuffling to her knees, she lifted her phone to the floor, pointing the camera at it. With the press of a button, the camera flashed. Sasha's blood ran cold. Gore. Remnants of something tainted the floor before her. A pile of mutilated flesh, bone, and blood, rendering its shape completely unknown. Sasha flashed the light again. As if the first glance wasn't already sickening enough, the second one bore more answers. There were no traces of clothing in the fleshy mess. Instead, remnants of torn and ripped fur, which could mean it was an animal. An animal, sure, but as for what kind was completely beyond her. It was too messy, mangled, and bloody to tell. Movement caught her attention in front of her. Sasha's breathing spiked as she lifted her chin. For the time she has been in the dark warehouse, her eyes seemed to have adjusted ever so slightly. In her vision, she could make out two shelving units side by side. One of them shook. Sasha's breathing shuddered as she stood up. She stared at the wall of darkness in front of her. A low, gurgling, croaking noise filled the dead silence in the warehouse. Sasha slowly lifted her phone, pointing it at the darkness before her. Her arm shuddered as she did. A whimper came out of her as she bit the bottom of her lip. She pressed the camera button on her phone. The camera flashed. The weaver shrieked. Sasha screamed, the male creature shielding its eyes from the blinding flash of the camera light. Her feet reacted, attempting to back her away from the hostile creature. The humanoid creature strained a scream back, pouncing from its narrow space between shelving units onto her. She was forced to the ground as it straddled on top of her. Sasha struggled as the creature pinned her to the floor. A shriek left its throat and passed the 4 large mandibles of teeth in its mouth. She threw her arms into directions, but it kept a firm grip on them to keep her still. Its alive eyes narrowed inside the black bags under them as a strained noise left its throat, its salivating tongue flinging out of its mouth for a quick moment. It lurched its head forward. A blood-curdling scream echoed throughout the warehouse from the poor victim as the sharp teeth punctured the flesh of her neck. Story, doctor didn't believe me. After reading several medical horror stories on here, it's no small wonder I hate going for anything medical. I thought I'd like to share my story. My experience is small potatoes compared to the rest, but here goes. Around late March of 2017, my right wrist was feeling particularly sore for several days. I bought a wrist brace and wore it during work, because at the time I had a job that required a lot of heavy lifting, upwards of 60 pounds. I favored my right wrist, overcompensating by using my left hand to bear the brunt of the weight whenever I could. My right wrist eventually healed over the course of a month or so. My self-diagnosis was that it was tendinitis. Unfortunately, the exertion on my left for the prolonged period caused severe tendinitis in my left wrist. In early May, I noticed the first symptoms. Again, I bought a wrist brace and lessened the load. Unlike with my right, my left was not improving. It worsened to the point that I had very limited movement of my wrist. Any accidental pressure or bumping of 2 of the tendons in my wrist, the ones leading up the thumb, resulted in terrible pain. By mid-July, knowing that my wrist should not still be in so much pain, I finally went to urgent care. The doctor examined my wrist and sent me on my way with a low-grade prescription painkiller. I took most of that medication over the course of the next 2 weeks and it did nothing. Finding that the treatment I was given had been useless, I didn't feel confident seeking further treatment. Even though my wrist was in pain, this was mostly typical if I moved, bent my wrist or accidentally bumped it. For nearly 3 more months I dealt with it. By October, my wrist had gradually worsened that it was constantly sore, at best, or leaving me in excruciating pain with tears rolling down my face and unable to use my left hand for up to an hour. In fact, my wrist felt as though it had locked up. I could barely flex my wrist at all by this point. I was barely using my left hand at all anyway, just to avoid causing pain. Finally, I booked an appointment with the local poor man's clinic that I was registered at the time. I go in for my appointment and after 20 minutes of waiting in the exam room, a doctor finally comes in. I explained to her my symptoms and for how long, telling her specifically that I physically cannot flex my wrist beyond a small degree and that attempting to do so causes tremendous pain. I also told her of my failed previous treatment. Her response? "You're just babying it," she says. Then, without hesitation, and as if to prove her point, she grabs my left arm in one hand and my left hand in her other, and rapidly torqued my wrist in a few directions before I yanked my wrist out of her grasp. Cradling my wounded appendage and with tears streaming down my face, she looked at me with an oh shit expression and told me very hurriedly that she is going to prescribe to me a muscle relaxer and a stronger pain reliever. I left the clinic and headed to the nearby pharmacy to get my prescriptions. While I'm waiting for them to be filled, still very sore from her manhandling, I kept thinking over what had just happened. Why didn't she believe me at first? Why had she been so aggressive to prove that my symptoms were nothing? Then it occurred to me that she likely suspected me of simply making up my injury in order to score some painkillers. My instant reaction to her examination made her realize very quickly how wrong she was. Over the next few days, I took both medications. Despite the relief from the pain, they left me feeling violently ill. After 4 days, I stopped taking them completely. Yes, I 100% wanted painkillers for my alleged addiction. Surprisingly, this doctor called me 2 days after I had stopped taking the meds to follow up with me. I admitted to her that I had stopped and why. She then prescribed to me an anti-nausea medication and told me to resume the other meds. I did as I was told. The pain subsided, though not completely, and my wrist remained stiff. That is, until nearly 2 weeks later. With the pain no longer at the forefront of my mind, I just happened to flex my wrist a little bit. I felt and heard a loud snap in my wrist. It didn't hurt at all, but there was a definite change for the better. It was as if 60% of the pressure in my wrist was suddenly gone and I had reclaimed some of my flexibility. I felt a great deal of emotional relief. A few days and a second snap later resulted in my complete recovery. Unfortunately, this experience has forever left me distrustful of the US healthcare system. I am wary of the day that I will have to rely on it. Story: I saw something I shouldn't have. For months or so ago, suddenly people started disappearing for no apparent reason. People I didn't know and someone I did. It was all over the news, and my family was panicking. I found his computer and discovered he had a hidden link in his note app. I clicked the link, and it flashed a lot of green, and the screen filled with these weird, almost indescribable symbols that never stayed the same and just went black. It freaked the hell out of me. I showed my parents, but when I opened it, it just took me to a Google page. Later that night, I went to my room and watched TV, but I noticed my computer screen turned on even though it was in sleep mode. I freaked the hell out because I watched my mouse move across the screen, open my notepad, and it seemed as though someone copied and pasted a link in my notepad. Someone hacked my computer, and I was about to just toss it out the freaking window, but alas, curiosity killed the cat. This is where things get really, really unbelievable. I clicked the link, and the symbols showed up again, but this time they formed what looked like an image of my brother who had disappeared. It was strange because it was an image made with symbols, so it looked like a painting of a madman. But it started moving. My brother started moving. The images shifted in ways that made it clear it was live. It was almost like a filter over the screen or something. My brother said, "Why didn't I pass?" I should have passed, which shocked me because I didn't expect him to speak. I freaked out and went to grab my parents, but just before stepping out of my door, everything went black like I had sudden tunnel vision. I felt myself falling even though I couldn't see, and when I hit the ground, I wasn't in my house anymore. I was in some white room, like everything was made with bioluminescent marble or something of the like. I started to panic and spun around, but when I turned back around, there was a man, if you could even call him that. He just appeared there like someone edited reality or some shit. He was tall and lanky without literally any features, no eyes, nose, mouth, anything. He had regular clothes on, a flannel and jeans and such, but the closest comparison I can make is Slender Man. But he told me to follow him if I could. Naturally, I said fuck no and demanded an explanation, but he turned and walked anyway, saying I'd regret it if I didn't move of my own accord eventually. I didn't even understand how this thing spoke, given it had no mouth. It walked away, and my feet began to slide across the floor like I was going downhill on ice, you know. Again, like reality had been freaking edited, a door just kind of appeared. No ripples or noise or mystical shit, it literally just was there like it always had been or something. The door opened as we got close to it, and beyond that door was, the best way to explain it was everything. It's impossible to put into words, but beyond that door was up, down, forward, back, left, right, and directions that just don't exist. It sounds nuts, but it was like crossing through every conceivable and inconceivable reality but staying in this one at the same time. I saw colors that I can't explain. Literally, I've tried to, but I just can't. They were colors I've never seen. No purple mixed with red and green or anything ever known, they just were. It literally, and I mean literally, made me feel like my eyes were melting. I couldn't tell if my eyes were watering or if my eyes themselves were turning into liquid. Maybe either. As we stepped further, my ears began to hear things. Whispers, screams, arguments, casual talk between people, all at once like I was Superman trying to suffer through it all. I knew I had to keep walking because I couldn't stand there anymore without dying. It was like I was feeling myself growing old and young and knowing all of it at once, which kinda makes no sense, but it's impossible to explain. My brain began to pop like the information was too much. I saw stars in my vision, and I couldn't breathe, but I was still breathing from everywhere except my lungs. I took another step, and suddenly I was in the white room again, but my brother sat there on a chair. I panicked and ran to him as my brain felt released from pressure. The man spoke again as I untied my brother, and he said word for word, "Congratulations, negatives. You are thick in blood," and suddenly I was in my room again like reality was edited or I had always been there the entire time. I ran to my brother's room, and he was there on his floor but panicked as my eyes and nose were bleeding. I passed out, and I woke up in the middle of nowhere with my brother unconscious next to me. I had a brain hemorrhage and lost vision in my left eye and hearing in my right ear after I visited the ER. My parents still don't know I'm alive or my brother, and we are 5 states away with no money or anything. We want to go back but don't want to go back to that state. The doctors tried to get info on us, but we refused and ran. Not sure what to do right now because my whole concept of reality is flipped. My brother went through the same thing, but he's much smarter than me, and I guess that's why he came out better than I did. Just freaking out. Story in the abyss. Head throbbing, pain shooting everywhere in my body. Is this a dream, or am I dead? Taking a big breath in was painful. I could barely fill my lungs before the pain was shooting everywhere, feeling like million tiny daggers stabbing me right inside my muscles and bones. Focusing on moving my fingers and toes, making sure if anything was broken. Opening my eyes at first everything was dark, there wasn't anything to see. When my eyes adjusted to the darkness I could vaguely make out shapes or something in the dark. Taking a second to listen to take in where I am now, it was so quiet, it felt like I could hear my thoughts. Nothing shows any sign of life. Gathering my strength to pull my right arm from its position to start pushing myself off the ground, having every muscle of my body screaming at me to stop moving, but I didn't want to just lay here to die. When I tried to use my left arm, but when I realized it was under something I couldn't make out. When I tried to pull it out it took some strength, but I managed to get it free. Getting to my knees, looked around me, there were so many shapes in the darkness. I was in a pile of something, but I don't know what. Then something hit my nose, a horrible gross smell, as if a bag of food has been sitting out in the sun on a hot summer day. It smelled musky and horrible. I didn't even want to breathe, it was making me gag a little. Remembering I had on the jacket, I felt for the zipper to undo it, taking off the jacket to only put it on backward to use the hoodie as a mask. It cut the smell down a little, but I could at least manage. But now I didn't know what to do. I was stuck somewhere with this horrible smell and can't see hardly anything. I tried to recall how I got here, remembering where I was before this, remembering I was at a bus stop, I was going somewhere and I got a phone call. The tone was so clear in my head in this silence, as it was this ugly lame default ringtone my phone had. For some reason now I can recall and hear that tone clearly. Listening closer I was hearing that damn ringer. It wasn't in my head, there was a phone somewhere in this darkness, meaning a source of light, and hoped to contact someone. Getting to my feet, I listened closely as the sound seemed to be echoing around the space I am in. Turning around, I could see a dim light coming from somewhere seeming far away. Without another hesitation, I forced my body to move, stepping on the shapes I was seeing and tripping constantly as I didn't know where to step, hoping whatever is causing this ringtone to go off, it didn't stop, it would stay on until I can get to it. Luck was not in my favor as the light and ringtone went off. Standing in this darkness again, I closed my eyes and prayed the ringtone would start again, my heart growing heavy as that phone could have been my one chance out of here. Feeling the hot tears swell in my eyes as I want to cry, begging for that ringtone again. Now in this silence, I took a moment to think about the shapes I was walking on, taking my left foot and moving it around until it hit something to my left, putting my foot on it. It was kind of smushy in some places, but hard in others. I didn't know what I was stepping on. As I was about to bend down to inspect whatever was under my foot, the ringtone broke the silence again. My prayers were answered without giving it a second thought. I went in the same direction, hoping it was the same phone form before. Soon the light came on. It had to be the screen. It was closer. As I got closer, I could see something was covering the screen, but it was still giving enough light to locate where it was. Still heading towards it, when the light was right at my feet, I dropped to my knees, feeling for it. I felt the rectangle shape. It was a phone, feeling it was in some kind of cloth. My heart was racing and my hands were sweaty and shaking, trying to free this phone before the ringer stops again. But I couldn't find an opening grating to just the cloth. I shook it, hoping the phone dropped out of whatever it was. I didn't stop until I hear the plastic and concrete hitting together. Finally seeing the phone screen, reading it, it was an alarm that said date with Annabella at 5. The shock of waking up in this dark hellhole was starting to wipe away as I picked up the phone and I dismissed the alarm. Seeing another person's face that I don't know on this screen, I wiped down to get the toolbar. Seeing the flashlight icon, I took a breath before hitting it as the light turned on. The worst scenes for any other human being to see was happening in front of me. Where the light touched was bodies and more bodies laying on the ground, all of them lifeless, but not a single fly or bug was down here looking at these people's faces. One girl I could see had pretty red ginger hair and beautiful green eyes. Her skin looked so warm. Still, I reached out, touching her forehead. There was still a little bit of warmth in her skin. I could feel my whole body tremble. My eyes burned with tears as my throat ached. I hate crying. I hate feeling so weak, but what else can I do? I screamed at the top of my lungs. I cried so loud, wanting anyone to hear me. If there was even a chance someone could hear me, I kept screaming and screaming and screaming. Story: me, a man, once birthed thousands of babies and then murdered them all. I was reminded this week of something that happened about 15 years ago. I must have told my wife the story before, because the other day when I began to reminisce, she loudly repeated "no, no, no, no" until I shut up. So here I am, to tell you guys instead. I live in a large coastal city in the subtropical region of Australia, and it was a humid and stinking hot summer, as it is every year. One night, my friend and I decided to escape the oppressive heat of the suburbs and drive to the bay to get some of the evening sea breeze, and maybe catch a fish or two for dinner. I cast my fishing line off a rock wall by a creek mouth, and my friend clambered around on the rocks with her knife eating oysters. There wasn't much of a breeze after all, but there was some moonlight and everything was peaceful on the slack tide. The bay here isn't one of those beautiful sandy beaches Australia is well known for. Sheltered by islands and with a large river feeding the bay with sediment, it's a region of mudflats, mangroves, and coastal wetlands. And quite naturally, billions upon billions of walking, crawling, flying, biting, blood-sucking insects. I'd applied insect repellent that night, but a cloud of mosquitoes and midges hung around anyway. They will prod and probe, looking for any chink in your armor. Any exposed flesh missed by the repellent is fair game to these tiny mongrels. I was getting bitten a little bit, but nothing unbearable, and then I felt a sharp pain between my shoulder blades. That's no mosquito. I swatted at my back, but the bite was right in that place that's hardest to reach, between the shoulders. The bastard had bitten me through my shirt, so I tugged at it and I felt a tiny weight lifted from my back. It must have been there for a while without me noticing, drinking my precious blood. I spun around, and in the moonlight caught a glimpse of some winged monstrosity lazily flying away. The pain from the bite was already fading, so I was relieved that I hadn't been stung by something venomous. There are some big blood-sucking flies around sometimes, so figured it was one of those. I didn't give it any more thought and went back to fishing. After some time, my friend dropped me home empty-handed. I both love and hate fishing. A few days later, another hot and humid day, I woke up badly hungover at around 10 a.m., and it was already over 30 degrees Celsius. Having slept in just my undies with no covers, I was sweaty and sticky. Head pounding, blurry vision. Was it possible to feel worse than this? Yes, it was. I was covered in spider webs. My half-dead brain instantly fired up all the neurons it could muster. There might be a spider on me, on my back. Fuck. I could feel webs on my back and shoulders. I'd heard the myths about people eating spiders in their sleep. Was this the evidence? Had I snatched up the spider in my sleep and gobbled it down? Or was it still on me? I was too afraid to reach back there and check. The thought of touching a large Australian spider with my bare hands was too much for me. But I could feel the webs, man. A lot of webs. I got up and went to the living room to seek help from my housemate. Dude, I can feel spider webs on me. I think I might have a spider on my back. I turned around for him to check. He took a quick glance. No, there's no spider. Then he did a double take. He took a step closer and examined me. After a pause, he bluntly stated what he saw. Bullshit, I laughed. I was relieved that there wasn't a spider, and what he had said was well in line with the pranks and wind-ups common in our household. Go look in the mirror then, he said, wide-eyed. Okay then. I went into the bathroom to check, as the spiderweb feeling was intensifying since I had gotten out of bed and started moving around. I was half convinced by now that my hungover brain was playing tricks on me, and my housemate was definitely full of shit. With some difficulty, I was able to turn my head around enough to see my back in the bathroom mirror. I had a red volcano between my shoulder blades, like a large pimple or maybe an ingrown hair that had popped and left a crater. Weird place to get one, I thought. The skin all over the top half of my back and shoulders had a gray tinge, most intensely near the volcano and radiating out to thinner gray near my arms. The area extended down to about halfway down my back. To my hungover eyes, the gray skin seemed to be subtly, gently rippling and moving. But I could feel the rippling. It felt like spider webs on my skin. Jesus, how much had I had to drink? I took a step backward towards the mirror, so I could get clearer view of the gray skin on my shoulder. Looking as closely as I could, that's when I saw them. My housemate hadn't been winding me up after all. The gray skin was tiny larvae. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands maybe. All wriggling and squirming away from their birthplace, the red volcano, my very own flesh. Their tiny crawling bodies felt so similar to having spider webs on your skin. I had forgotten about the insect bite from a few nights before, but now it all made sense. The insect hadn't bitten me, it had violated me in another way altogether, pierced my skin and used me to host its brood. It must have been there for quite some time laying. Horror. In that moment, a sizable portion of my brain went to some faraway happy place, and what was left was sufficient enough to remove my undies and amble over to the shower. Having cold showers during summer here is normal, and probably the reason the eggs in my flesh had survived so long, but despite the intense heat of the day I cranked the shower to full hot. I just stood silently with my back to scalding stream for as long as I could stand it, making sure every single last one of those tiny gray freaks had been blasted to hell. And that's the story. I was fishing the other day and a March fly bit me through my shirt and reminded me of the time I birthed and then murdered thousands of baby monsters. My wife didn't want to hear about it again, so thanks for reading. Story, Gray Face. Tick, 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 the sound of the clock ticking ran through the detention room. The room was dead silent, only filled with one other student and myself. The other student was sitting on the other side of the room, not paying any attention to me or their surroundings. I would take a nap to save myself from this purgatory, but the constant ticking of the clock ran through my brain like an alarm clock. Tick, tick, tick. I considered making conversation with the other student, but they didn't seem like much for conversation. They seemed around my age, 16 or 17, their short brown hair sat on their shoulders. The way they dressed and presented themselves made them look like your average innocent girl, but then we made eye contact. Her eyes were light blue, but they might as well have been scarlet red. They had a sort of fierceness in them that would make anyone shiver. I could feel her judgment crawl down my spine. I quickly turned away, not wanting to poke the beast anymore. I started to think about how I ended up here. I don't even remember, in all honesty, everything is kind of a blur. I know it was in the hallway, everything was normal, and then it was all red. I remember the rage, the hatred, and anger flowing through my body, any humanity in me drained away as I became a savage husk of anger. I think I hurt someone, but I can't remember. I don't think I want to. Finally, the teacher walked in to save me from myself. He was a tall man with a stern face. You could tell he's been dealing with troublemakers for a while, and he wasn't going to crack. His voice was deep and imposing. "You know why you're here," he said. "You're here because the school needs to punish you while they figure out if you're worth expelling or not." Expelled? I thought to myself. What had I done that set me up for expulsion? I could feel the memory trying to escape, but was unable to reach the surface. The teacher once again spoke. "You'll be here for a few hours. Exits are magnetically locked, with the main office being able to unlock them once your time is up. Your phones are in the office as well. You'll receive them once detention is over." The student next to me raised her hand. "Yes, Laura?" said the teacher, obviously annoyed. "How long do we have to do this for?" said the girl, presumably named Laura. "You both will be here until the school expels you or lets you off," said the teacher. However, for some people, the teacher looked over at me. Expulsion is more likely. I lowered my head in shame. I don't even know what I did, and here I am being reprimanded for it. It happened this morning, only a few hours ago, so why can't I remember? Whatever I did wrong, it's going to cost me a lot. First I had to wait after school until 6, and now I have detention until 9. Now I'm being told I could be expelled. I raised my head once I felt that the teacher's disappointing glaze had left. "So make yourself comfortable," said the teacher. "I'm going to be right back. I need to grab something from my car. Once I'm back, it's going to be 3 hours of silence." The teacher walked out and closed the door behind him. The second the door closed, the girl next to me laid back in her chair. After a few minutes of silence, she finally turned to me. "What did you do?" she said. "Huh?" I responded. "What did you do? What did you do to get here?" I turned to her, her fierce eyes piercing through my soul. I don't know," I responded meekly. "You don't know? What do you mean you don't know?" She sounded annoyed, like my answer offended her somehow. I heard a rumor about you," she said. "I heard they are holding you here because they are waiting for the police to figure out what to do." I looked at her, hoping to see that she was joking, but the intensity in her eyes said otherwise. "I also heard about what you did." Her eyes turned from fierce to straight-up hatred. "And if it's true, you're lucky I don't bash your head against a wall for what you did." With this comment, I stood up. "I'm going to find the teacher," I said. "The teacher won't save you from responsibility," said Laura. I turned away from her and began to exit the room when she let out one more remark. "You know, it's ironic, you didn't want to lose your friends to her. Yet you lost them anyway." I closed the door behind me. I felt sickened. Those weren't just empty threats. Those were real. I began walking towards the entrance of the school, letting what Laura said sink in. I didn't want to lose my friends to her? Who was her? Suddenly a memory unlocked, my brain finally allowing me to slightly remember what it was forcing me to forget. Bethany, her name was Bethany. Bethany is a new girl at our school, and she is perfect. Super nice, super smart, and the sweetest little thing. She had recently integrated into my little friend group. Everyone in the group basically showered her in attention, but that wasn't a problem for me. She's just a new part of the gang, and I don't have anything against her. I wouldn't hurt Bethany, she's my friend. I wouldn't. All these thoughts stopped once I reached the entrance. The front entrance was in ruins. The ceiling had been torn down with rubble, blocking the entrance entirely. There was no way to access it, and even if you could squeeze through, you would risk the whole mess collapsing on you. And then there was the body. My teacher was lying on the floor. His body was mangled to the point you could barely recognize him. His face was practically torn off. His blood and entrails spread across the floor and walls. The smell hit the hardest. It was the most disgusting thing I had ever smelled in my entire life. I stood there for a while, not knowing what to do. How did this happen? Who had done this? Then I heard the stomping. I began to run back to the classroom as the stomping behind me only got louder. I didn't know if it was behind me or not, but I didn't want to find out. Whatever was there let out an unholy noise. It sounded like it was screeching while inhaling. The noise pierced my skull as I continued to run in horror. I reached the detention classroom and ran inside, closing the door behind me. The room was empty, Laura was nowhere to be seen. Whatever got the teacher must have gotten her too. But what was it? The thumps got louder and louder, with the screeching continuing at random intervals. Suddenly the shadow of the creature passed by the window of the classroom. I couldn't see much of it, but I knew one thing for sure. It wasn't human. I waited for what seemed like an eternity until I felt as though the monster was gone. I opened the door slowly and peered out. The hallway was no longer lit up, the lights were completely smashed. All I could make out was the outlines of the classroom doors and lockers. I took a deep breath and stepped out, trying to be as silent as possible. My best move was to get to the office. The controls for the magnetic locks were in there, and so was my phone. I could call for help and unlock the magnetic doors, letting me leave. Plus, the office faculty may still be in there and could be oblivious to the monster roaming around. The least I could do is try to warn them. I started to make my way through the hallway, trying not to make a sound. I was on the first floor and I knew the office was on the second. I just had to make it up the stairs without running into that thing again. I made my way through the halls quietly and paranoid. I had never felt so much fear in my entire life. Each second felt hours long, and I knew I could easily be found at any moment. I felt alone. Everyone I trusted wasn't with me anymore. All my friends were busy with their own lives, so I was left to face the darkness alone. I felt like I had no one by my side. No one to trust. No one to lean on. I was all on my own. But yet they all paid attention to Bethany. They all talked to Bethany, they all hung out with Bethany. Why were my friends there for her? Why weren't they there for me? I suddenly snapped out of my trance. What were those feelings? Why am I thinking about Bethany and my friends right now? They have nothing to do with this. I felt alone at the moment, as I was locked in a school with a monster, but that was something different. That was a memory. That's how I felt. What had I done? Before I could remember anything else, I saw it. It was staring in front of me at the other end of the hall. It was at least 3 times my height. It had a large skull-like face. Its arms were long and its hands were huge, each with incredibly long and skinny fingers. Its legs were large as well, with backward knees and large deformed feet. His entire body was malnourished, with his skin tight around his bones. You could see its rib cage and you could see it breathing. Its eyes and mouths were hollow, with only a faint red light in its eyes. We stared at each other for what seemed like hours. Both equally fascinated in the other. It then started to raise its hand. It slowly extended its arm and finger, pointing at me with no expression on its face. Then it let out a screech. And then it started to move. I ran in the opposite direction of the hallway, trying to reach the other staircase behind me. I could hear the creature screeching and stomping forward. I turned around at one point to see it. Its hands were in front of it like a T-Rex, and it was stomping forward at incredible speed. Adrenaline rushed through my body as I pushed myself to reach the staircase. I ran up the stairs as the creature continued to howl behind me. I reached the second floor with the office in reach. Suddenly a hand grabbed me and pulled me into a classroom. I tried to scream, but a hand covered my mouth. It was Laura. She motioned me to be quiet by putting her finger on her lip. Outside we heard the monster pass, still letting out its horrific screeches. Once the noises had faded, Laura removed her hand from my mouth and began to talk. "You're lucky I even saved you after what you did," said Laura. "I don't know what you're talking about," I responded. "I didn't do anything to Bethany, I didn't hurt her." Laura turned to me with an angry look in her eyes. "Funny you should say that," she said intensely, "because I never mentioned Bethany." My eyes widened as I realized my slip-up. "You know what you did," said Laura. "You just don't want to remember." With that, something snapped within me. "Shut up!" I screamed as I knocked Laura to the ground. She stood up and punched me in the jaw, knocking me to the floor. "Admit to what you did," she screamed, hitting me again as I lay on the floor. "Admit it. You know what you did, admit it." Suddenly the hand of the creature burst through the classroom door. Both of us jumped back in fear. The creature howled its horrific screech as it clawed its way through the door and into the classroom. It stood tall, still letting out its hollow screech. Laura was quick to act, picking up a nearby textbook and charging at the monster. She swung the textbook at the creature and hit it square in the jaw. The creature stumbled back and crashed into the wall, letting out a screech of pain. Laura ran back to me and grabbed my arm, pulling me up. Just as we were about to leave the classroom, however, the creature's hand launched forward and grabbed Laura. She screamed in fear as the creature tried to pull her away. I grabbed on to Laura's arm, refusing to let her go. The creature, however, was stronger and grabbed Laura with its other hand. With Laura screaming in fear and pain, I watched as her arm slowly began to tear, before coming off completely in my hands. The blood poured out of what was once her arm, drenching the classroom in the dark red liquid. I watched in horror as the creature lifted Laura into the air, grabbing Laura's head with one hand and her feet with the other. Then as Laura screamed in pain and absolute terror, I watched as the creature began to pull. I could hear the bones cracking, I could hear the skin ripping, all while Laura screams in agony. Finally the tension gave in and the creature with a loud howl ripped Laura in half. Her intestines sprawled out as blood and entrails began to cover the floor. Her upper half laid lifeless in the creature's hands, her expression still locked in a terrified scream. The creature, body in hand, let out a terrifying screech, and as I began to run out of the classroom and towards the office, I reached the office with the monster still screeching in the distance. I opened the door to find what I expected. The faculty were all mangled, with blood coating the walls. I ran behind the desk and first unlocked the magnetic doors. I then opened up the desk and grabbed my phone. I called 911 as I could hear the screeching getting louder. After what felt like an eternity, the line picked up. "Hello 911, what's your emergency?" "Hello," I yelled. "I need help, there's a dash shot." The monster's hands burst through the ceiling above me, causing me to drop my phone as I scream in terror. I ran out of the room without even thinking. I could worry about the police later, the doors were unlocked. I had to leave. I ran through the hallway as the monster attempted to claw its way through the ceiling in the office. I was going to make it. I was going to make it. And then I saw her locker. Bethany. Bethany's locker. I tried to avoid looking at it, but I couldn't. What Laura said rang through my head. "You know what you did, you just don't want to remember." I tried to push the memory away. This wasn't the time. This wasn't the place. I looked at the locker again as I heard the monster screaming in the distance. "I don't care anymore. I don't care if it hurts. I don't care if I die. I don't want to forget anymore. I want to remember. I remember the morning. I remember feeling alone. All of my friends were busy with their own lives, leaving me to face my darkness alone. I was sad, I was alone, I was scared. And then I saw her. Bethany. Talking with my friends as always. I remember the jealousy. Why did they only care about her? Why were they always there for her? Why were they never there for me? I remember the rage, I remember the darkness and fear inside me taking over. I remember the happiness on her face when she saw me. I remember when that happiness turned into fear. I remember the blood as I smashed her head against the locker repeatedly. I remember the fear on my friend's face. I remember them trying to hold me back as I stomped her head in with my feet. I remember her barely breathing. I remember the ambulance taking her away. I remember being placed in the detention room until the police and faculty could figure out what to do. I remember the fear of losing my friends to her. I remember the jealousy of not being happy like her. I remember my hatred for her. I hated her. I hurt her. I almost killed her. With that memory, I stopped where I stood. I fell to my knees in tears. What had I done? I had let my jealousy, my fear of loneliness take over, and where had that gotten me? I was all alone now. No friends. No future. No hope. I could hear the monster behind me now, but I don't care. I don't deserve to live for what I've done. I deserve to die. The monster grabbed my shoulders and turned me around as it lifted me up. I stared at his hollow red eyes as tears flowed down my face. I'm sorry, Bethany. I'm sorry, everyone. I deserve this. The monster's eyes began to glow a brilliant orange. His mouth soon followed, filling with that bright brilliant light as he let out his howl. I stared at the lights, mesmerized by their brilliance. Then it went black. I woke up in a room with my hands tied to a hook on the ceiling. It seemed to be a boiler room. If it was the boiler room of the school or some other building, I did not know. The room was small, only containing a boiler and a drain on the floor. The drain was stuffed with what looked like flesh and feces. The walls around me are old and disgusting. The wallpaper peels in multiple areas. The room smelled horrible, the smell coming from the feces and rotting flesh in the drain. I looked around and saw other hooks with rotting bodies with their hands tied just like me. Suddenly in a corner, I saw it. The creature. It noticed me and slowly made its way over. I tried to move as it approached, but it was no use. The creature walked over to me and stood in front of me. I could feel its breath hitting my face. I wasn't scared to die, I wanted to die, why hadn't it killed me? Finally, I found the courage to speak. What do you want? The creature stared at me before extending its hand and caressing my face with its long fingers. Then it spoke, and its answer was more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. Friends. Bye and see you again in the next videos and stories.